What happens when an apology is not about healing, but about control? What happens when saying sorry becomes a performance instead of accountability? Tonight, we are breaking down the apology that looks sincere, sounds reflective, but reveals something far more unsettling. Because as the words get softer, the power play gets sharper. And by the end of this story, you will see why accepting an apology is not always the same as finding peace, and why sometimes the most shocking moment is not what is said, but what is finally refused. This story begins in a place that feels deceptively calm because on the surface, it looks like an attempt at peace, an attempt at reflection, an attempt at growth. But the deeper you go, the more unsettling it becomes, because this is not a story about healing. It is a story about power and timing and image, and the quiet pressure placed on people to accept words that do not match actions. For a very long time, viewers watched relationships unravel in slow motion, watched distance replace connection, watched silence become louder than arguments. And then, suddenly, when the narrative no longer feels manageable, when control no longer feels guaranteed, an apology appears, not in private, not quietly, not centered on the people who were hurt, but placed carefully in front of an audience, framed as maturity, framed as spiritual clarity, framed as closure. And that is where the tension begins, because true accountability does not need an audience, and real remorse does not arrive on a schedule that benefits the person who caused the harm. And as these apologies unfold, there is an immediate sense that something is missing, because the words feel rehearsed and circular, always returning to the speaker, always centering his emotions, his journey, his relief, his desire for peace. And the people who lived through the consequences are positioned as supporting characters in a story about his growth, rather than individuals with their own unresolved pain. And this dynamic creates an undercurrent of unease because viewers recognize the pattern, a pattern where apologies are offered not to repair damage, but to relieve discomfort. A pattern where saying sorry becomes a tool rather than a truth. And the more the word is repeated, the less meaning it carries, because it is never followed by the acknowledgement of specific harm, never followed by sustained change, never followed by humility. And instead, it becomes a transaction, a performance where the expectation is that once the words are spoken, forgiveness should automatically follow. And when it does not, the responsibility subtly shifts back onto the people who were hurt, as if their hesitation is the problem. And this is where the emotional weight of the story truly settles, because it mirrors a broader experience that many people recognize: the pressure to accept apologies in the name of harmony, the pressure to appear gracious, the pressure to keep the peace, even when doing so requires suppressing valid feelings. And this pressure is intensified by culture, by belief systems, by social conditioning that teaches especially women that their role is to smooth over discomfort rather than name it. And so these on-camera moments become about much more than a single family or a single relationship. They become a reflection of how often accountability is performative and how rarely it is transformative. And as each conversation unfolds, there is a growing realization that the apology is being used as a reset button, an attempt to rewrite the past without truly confronting it, an attempt to move forward without carrying the weight of what came before. And yet, healing does not work that way. Trust does not work that way, and relationships do not repair themselves through language alone. And what makes this story so compelling is not anger or bitterness, but restraint, the quiet refusal to participate in a narrative that feels incomplete, the calm boundary setting, the neutral responses, the decision to no longer center one's life around someone else's need for validation. And this restraint speaks louder than any speech because it disrupts the expected script. It refuses to provide the emotional payoff that the performance demands. And in doing so, it exposes the gap between appearance and reality, between apology and accountability. And as viewers watch, they are left with a lingering question that grows heavier with each scene. Can words alone ever be enough when patterns remain unchanged? And the answer feels increasingly clear, because real change is uncomfortable, real accountability requires sustained effort, and real remorse does not ask for applause. And until those elements appear, the apology remains what it has been from the start, a carefully constructed moment designed to soothe the speaker rather than heal the people who were hurt. And that unresolved tension is what keeps the story moving, what keeps viewers watching, what keeps the discomfort alive, because closure has not been earned, and peace cannot be forced, and healing cannot be scripted. As the story continues, the emotional stakes rise, not through shouting or confrontation, but through what is left unsaid, through pauses, through polite smiles that do not reach the eyes, and through responses that are carefully measured, because the people on the receiving end of these apologies understand something deeply important, that words alone cannot undo years of distance and neglect. And this is where the narrative becomes truly compelling, because the audience begins to see the difference between surface-level reconciliation and internal resolution. The apology keeps circling back to themes of peace, growth, and moving forward, yet it never fully lands on responsibility. It never settles into the discomfort of specific harm caused. It never lingers on the impact of favoritism, emotional withdrawal, or public dismissal. Instead, it frames the past as something mutual, something unfortunate, something that simply happened rather than something actively chosen. And this framing is subtle but powerful because it spreads accountability so thin that it nearly disappears. And the result is an apology that sounds complete but feels unfinished. And this creates a quiet tension that builds scene by scene, because viewers are waiting for the moment when the focus finally shifts away from explanation and toward repair. But that moment never quite arrives, and in its absence, the burden once again falls on the women to respond correctly, to be understanding, to be gracious, to be emotionally generous, even when generosity has not been extended to them in return. And this expectation is not spoken aloud, but it hangs in the air, reinforced by the setting, reinforced by the cameras, reinforced by years of conditioning that teaches women that saying no to an apology is somehow unkind. And this is why the smallest acts of resistance feel so powerful. A calm redirection, a refusal to engage deeply, a statement that the past is in the past without offering emotional absolution. These moments disrupt the script, and they create a different kind of suspense, because instead of wondering what will be said next, the audience wonders whether the old patterns will finally lose their grip. And as these conversations unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that the apology is being treated as an ending rather than a beginning, a final chapter rather than the first step in a long process. And that is where the disconnect lies, because real healing is slow and often invisible. It does not provide immediate relief or public validation, and it certainly does not center the comfort of the person who caused the harm. And yet, comfort seems to be the primary outcome sought here. Relief, peace, a sense of closure that allows the speaker to move on unburdened. And this imbalance is what keeps viewers engaged, because it reflects a reality many people have lived through, the experience of being asked to accept an apology, not because it is earned, but because it is convenient. And as the story continues, the audience becomes increasingly aware that the most honest moments are not the speeches, but the silences, not the declarations, but the boundaries, and not the apology itself, but the choice of whether or not to accept it. Because in that choice lies autonomy, dignity, and self-respect. And that is what ultimately shifts the power dynamic, because healing does not require agreement, and closure does not require consensus. And when someone chooses to prioritize their own well-being over performative peace, it challenges the entire structure that allowed harm to persist in the first place. And this realization lingers long after the conversation ends, because it reframes the narrative from one about forgiveness to one about agency. And that shift is what makes this story resonate, because it reminds viewers that they are not obligated to carry someone else's need for redemption, and that sometimes the most powerful response is not anger or confrontation, but clarity and distance. And as the apology tour continues, that clarity becomes harder to ignore, revealing that without sustained change, without consistent effort, without actions that match the words, the apology remains incomplete, and the tension remains unresolved, leaving the audience not with closure, but with a deeper understanding of what accountability truly requires. In the end, this was never about saying sorry. It was about who gets to control the story. Because real accountability is quiet, consistent, and uncomfortable. And without it, an apology is just noise. You are never required to accept words that do not come with change. And sometimes the strongest form of healing is choosing yourself, even when the camera is still rolling.